Joined by my guy, Kris of Cowboys Beat. Before we jump into anything, here's what I will say. If you have any desire to follow the worst team in sports, the Dallas Cowboys, this guy is your dude to watch, to listen to. He's the only Cowboys fan. He's the only Cowboys reporter, opinionist that makes any sense. So there's a few different Cowboys topics I want to talk about today. I called him up. I was like, hey, Kris, let's jump into this. You can yell at me. There were some things he was already yelling at me over text, and I literally had to text him, save it for the pod. Save it for you to just go after me. Kris, Cowboys Beat, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, my friend. How about yourself?
Just living the dream, It's a beautiful, what is it, Sunday today? Got to go back to work tomorrow. I'm just excited for it. Hey, let's just quickly jump right into it. This week, this is something I want to talk about with you more than anyone else that I know, because you just simply get it. You're not a fanboy. You watch the film. You honestly are smarter than I am when it comes to the film, which is saying something. Don't get a big head. You're not smarter than me. But when the film, it is very interesting. Some of the things you pick up. This top 10 list that was released by ESPN this week from coaches, execs, scouts. I just want to quickly get your just first reactions to it. We saw Patrick Mahomes, number 1, Joe Burrow, number 2, Josh Allen, 3, Lamar Jackson, 4, Matthew Stafford, 5, Justin Herbert, 6, CJ Stroud, 7, Aaron Rodgers, 8, Jared Goff, 9, Dak Prescott, 10. Immediately when you see this list, what's your reaction?
This list reminds me a lot of the quarterback list. Dak
for
his playoff. 4. If we're going to tax a guy like Dak Prescott for his playoff performances, we need to make sure that we're keeping that standard when it comes to Lamar Jackson. I see Aaron Rodgers in here, and don't get it wrong. Like, I believe that Aaron Rodgers is the most talented quarterback I've ever seen play the position. But when we're talking about the year of 2024, when Aaron Rodgers hasn't played the quarterback position at a high level since 2021, having him in the top 10 to me, I don't think is fair to other quarterbacks that have been producing at a high level, especially because when the last time we saw Aaron Rodgers play, it was against the Detroit Lions in Lambeau with a playoff spot on the line, and he didn't play well in that game. So I look at this list and I just see a lot of inconsistency, and I don't see any type of criteria, which is something that I feel like people need to practice more when it comes to these top 10 lists.
It's really interesting, the Aaron Rodgers thing. It really is fascinating. Aaron Rodgers, I'm not upset he's in the top 10 because I just feel like he's grandfathered in, right? But here's a really, really important tidbit that everyone forgets when it comes to Aaron Rodgers. He wasn't very good his last year in Green Bay. He wasn't. It was his final year in Green Bay. He wasn't awful. And granted, he's way better than Zach Wilson, even at that point in his career in Green Bay. But then he tears his Achilles. He goes over to the New York Jets. And if anyone has a history of moving off of quarterbacks at the right time, it's the Green Bay Packers. So I'm not livid by number 8 being on this list, but it's interesting because the Dak Prescott narrative, it's hard for me to say, and I understand the casual NFL fan will think I'm nuts. It's hard for me to say right now in their careers, Dak Prescott isn't at minimum as good as Aaron Rodgers. And I feel like maybe NFL execs, coaches, and scouts see it as a tie and they just give it to Aaron Rodgers, which I'm not against, but you're right. 8, I know it's Aaron Rodgers, but it just seems a little high. What are we missing here?
Yeah, I think that teams and executives have a lot of respect for what Aaron Rodgers has done in the past. But again, I just feel it's disrespectful to a lot of the quarterbacks that have played at a very high level this year, or even quarterbacks that played at a high level last year that might have just had a down year this year. So, to me, when it comes to Aaron Rodgers, he is a bit older. I have high hopes for the Jets. I think Aaron Rodgers is going to have a great season. Maybe they look at Aaron Rodgers and they say, all right, we're going to project a little bit for this season, because the Jets, let's be honest here, they made some good moves this offseason to improve the surrounding cast around Aaron Rodgers. They beefed up their offensive line. They drafted Malachi Corley in the draft. They already have Garrett Wilson, who will probably be regarded as a top 10 wide receiver in football unanimously by the end of the season. I think they're projecting a bit here and saying, we believe Aaron Rodgers is going to have a very good year this year, which I wouldn't disagree with. But that's kind of my problem when it comes to these lists, is that, I hear sometimes when two people are debating a quarterback, they're like, okay, well, this quarterback has more potential. Well, I don't necessarily like judging the quarterback position from that standpoint, because you're basing something on something that one person hasn't done yet. So that's kind of, I think, what we might be missing, is that they might be projecting a bit, but I don't really see much of a reason outside of what Aaron Rodgers has done from, the year of 2021, 22, because I guess that's when they played that last playoff game in Green Bay, before that. So that's kind of the way I look at, maybe that's what we're missing here. But again, I can't agree with Aaron Rodgers being in the top 10 at the current moment, even though I believe he'll have top 10, top 5 type of season this year, because I have high hopes for the Jets.
It's interesting. I'm not going to buy into the Jets until I see it. That is something last year that I thought I was on the train. I still didn't think they were a Super Bowl team. I'll believe it when I see it. But you talk about potential, and I want to segue into this. Justin Herbert is 6th on this list. I know it's a guy you're a fan of. I'm not a Justin Herbert hater. I like to think of myself as a Justin Herbert truther. His only playoff game, he squandered a 27-point lead in the playoffs. He, outside of his rookie season, hasn't done a lot. Yes, rookie of the year. Yes, set the rookie touchdown passing record. I get all that. And I understand the Brandon Staley thing. Brandon Staley's a buffoon. But you could argue with me that Dak Prescott is more deserving of the 6th spot than Justin Herbert. I wouldn't agree with you, but I would listen to the argument. And this Justin Herbert narrative, and it's like kind of the meme of Justin Herbert and made up scenarios, and they'll say it's Tom Brady. I like Justin Herbert, and I love Jim Harbaugh, and I think he's due for a much better year than years past, simply because regardless of the Keenan Allen or the Mike Williams exits, new coaching and a new regime changes everything, and Jim Harbaugh wins everywhere he goes. But I just want Justin Herbert to win a playoff game before we label him the 6th best quarterback in the NFL, and I get it. The potential's there, and the eye test is there. Justin Herbert, when you just look at him, he looks like a top 3 quarterback in the NFL. But still at times, he struggles to have it translate on the field and to wins. How much of that is on Justin Herbert and his ability to not succeed in just not the playoffs, but getting to the playoffs as a whole? And how much of that really was just Brandon Staley's fault?
Well, so here's my thing when it comes to Justin Herbert. A lot of the talk around Justin Herbert is what he hasn't done. And my debate when it comes to that, my pushback is, okay, well, look at what he has done. You look back at that 2021 season, I believe they won 9 games that year, following that up with a year where they won 10 games. And now remember, this is a Chargers team that I think gets more credit than they deserve when it comes to their supporting cast. It's kind of like the Dallas Cowboys thing, to where I say, okay, yeah, they have a lot of big names, but they don't really have a coach that puts it all together. And even some of those individual players, a lot of them are not healthy or just don't play up to the standard that I think some people hold them to. And I think that's kind of where Justin Herbert runs into a little bit of a problem. But like when you talk about it, 2021, they won 9 games. In the AFC, mind you, they play the Chiefs twice a year, and they beat the Chiefs that year. They go in 2022, they won 12 games or 10 games. And again, they play the Chiefs. They play all these really good teams in the AFC. I feel like if the Chargers, not even just Justin Herbert on any of these teams in the NFC, but I feel like if the Chargers were in the NFC, they would win a lot more games. I think Justin Herbert would have more playoff success. And not only on top of that, I think that he would get a lot more respect from people because of the fact that he would have a lot more playoff success. But, you bring up Brandon Staley. Not a fan of his whatsoever. Don't think he was a good coach. And not only that, when it's not just a Brandon Staley thing, because he's on the defensive side of the ball. I look at what they have with their offensive coordinator with Joe Lombardi. He was a very poor play caller. And then they follow it up by bringing in Kellen Moore, who Kellen Moore is a fine OC, probably like top 15 play caller in football. But the thing is with his offense is it's very much based in terminology. There's a lot to grasp with that offense. It's a very complex offense. And for him to come in this year with the injuries that they've had on their offensive line and in their receiver room, they kind of put Justin Herbert in a bad spot when it came to that this past season. So, there are a lot of things that go into this Justin Herbert conversation. And you're right. The ceiling for Justin Herbert is sky high, but I also think Justin Herbert has played at a very high level. And when we talk about, taxing Justin Herbert for playoff wins or playoff performances, again, I feel like we need to maintain consistency with that when it comes to just a lot of other quarterbacks in the league, because, we could talk about Lamar Jackson and his playoff performances. And we could talk about other guys. We could talk about Dak and his playoff performances. We could talk about, hell, even Jalen Hurts. I know he made it to the Super Bowl, but he hasn't necessarily played great in the playoffs either. There's plenty of quarterbacks that you can bring this up with. And, Justin Herbert just happens to be one of those guys. But when it just comes to a pure talent thrower of the football, he has one of the best arms that you'll ever see in the game of football. I compare it a lot to Aaron Rodgers from that standpoint. When it comes to his ability to make plays within structure, not many are better than him at that. I struggle to find 2 or 3 guys that are better than him at that. I think Josh Allen is a little bit better out of structure, but I think Herbert has Josh Allen arm strength on top of Aaron Rodgers arm talent, even though Aaron Rodgers had a great arm. And, you just see these things. And again, my criteria when it comes to the quarterback position is who is the best talent, who plays the position at the highest level. And when you look at Justin Herbert, he is definitely one of those guys that play it at the very top of the game.
The Justin Herbert thing I could talk about for hours, but you mentioned Josh Allen. Let me ask you this, and then I'll just jump on a tangent really here about Josh Allen. Who's the second best quarterback in the NFL? Who is it to you?
Josh Allen.
Okay, it's Josh Allen, correct? Now, I understand the response to Joe Burrow beat him in Buffalo in the playoffs, but then you think about it. Josh Allen is a life preserver for the Buffalo Bills. Where were the Bills before Josh Allen? Now, you can make that same argument for the Bengals with Joe Burrow, and I would accept that argument. But the issue is, never had a offensive line that was good. It was always just a mediocre offensive line, and it looks better because Josh Allen's able to get out of pressure better than a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL. The run game was never there until about halfway through the season, and James Cook popped. He had a good wide receiver and an elite wide receiver at times, Stephon Diggs, up until last year, but he was a head case. He went after Josh Allen. Josh Allen never said anything bad about him. And just like all these quarterbacks on this list, outside of Aaron Rodgers, all have an offensive head coach. All of them. Josh Allen and Aaron Rodgers don't, more specific to Josh Allen here, doesn't have an offensive coordinator type of head coach that's able to scheme plays like Andy Reid, like Matt LaFleur, like whoever it would be. Is Josh Allen underappreciated? Is he undervalued? Because I get putting him at 3. I'm not going to die on the hill of Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, because I think they're both awesome. But is Josh Allen underappreciated because he throws 1 or 2 many picks for your liking, but he's throwing to lawn deck chairs and Stephon Diggs forcing him passes? Because if he doesn't, you're going to hear about it in the media later. Where are you on the Josh Allen front? Has he become undervalued?
Oh, yeah, certainly. Josh Allen has one of the hardest jobs in football. Playing quarterback in Buffalo is not like playing quarterback in, let's just say, Miami or a dome team like the Minnesota Vikings, Dallas Cowboys, where you're playing in a dome. You're playing in some of the worst conditions that you're going to see on a football field anywhere. And I don't think he gets enough credit for that. And when it comes to, their roster construction, I think that Brandon Beane has, quite frankly, not face the type of criticism he probably deserves. I remember last season he said, I don't want to be bad enough to go get a Jamar Chase. Well, I mean, you could have had Justin Jefferson, and I get it. It's hindsight, but guess what? When you make these decisions, it is a hindsight league. And when you trade off of a Justin Jefferson for a Stephon Diggs, I'm going to criticize you for that. It's hindsight. I get it, but that's how we analyze these things. I don't think it's a great team that he has around him. The defense has not played at a high level in the playoffs. People can throw all these regular season numbers at me, but the performance that they've had in the regular season has not translated into the postseason when it comes to the defense. He doesn't have great pieces around him, especially this past season. Stephon Diggs was good, but he wasn't playing at the level that we know Stephon Diggs can play at. Maybe that changes in Houston. That's not the discussion right now. But, outside of that, here's the thing. When it comes to the defensive side of the ball, you can take one player out of a game. And if you want to go and attack Stephon Diggs, roll coverage over that side, play double, double him and stuff like that, you can do that when it comes to, playing on the defensive side of the ball. So when it comes to that, you're going to force things into a receiver that's going to let you know when he doesn't get the football. He's been put in a really tough situation. And unfortunately, he's faced a lot of unfair criticism because of that. Some of the criticism that he does face is fair. But at the same time, when it comes to this league right now and the quarterbacks in the league, there's no way I'm taking Joe Burrow over Josh Allen. There's just not any type of way.
It would be seen as a hot take, right? You saying something like that because of Joe Burrow's accomplishments. He's been to a Super Bowl. The most impressive thing about Joe Burrow is getting sacked 9 times against a 1 seed and winning the game. But there's just something about Josh Allen where I'm not going to critique him for carrying the Buffalo Bills organization. It's never really been well supported. The defenses have been good, but at times injured and less than ideal in some circumstances. The offensive line has never been elite. They never really went to go get him a running game until James Cook finally stepped in the picture lately. So the Josh Allen thing, I know it's a hot take to say he's underappreciated or undervalued, or at this point, just a guy that is taken for granted in the NFL. It just doesn't feel fair to me to just go directly after Josh Allen for throwing 1 or 2 more picks than you like because he's being asked to carry an organization. Now, kind of segueing over to this is your expertise. I want to hear what you have to say. Jared Goff, number 9. Aaron Rodgers, number 8. Dak Prescott, number 10. I have been highly critical of Dak Prescott in the past. But I can take off the fanboy glasses. I can put the pom-poms down. He, at number 10, after an MVP caliber season, because we're just analyzing like regular season success at this point, because if we are analyzing postseason success as well, Lamar Jackson's got to come down a couple of notches. I know he's got 2 MVPs, but we don't really care about that. No one does. Every NFL fan has explained to me how much it doesn't matter unless you win in the playoffs, whether it's in the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, you name it. But the Dallas Cowboys, 3 straight years of 12 wins. I've been highly critical of Dak Prescott. He wins the division last year, has basically taken over the conversation of who's the best quarterback in the NFC East. I don't think you can argue it's Jalen Hurts right now. Where does it land for you that Dak Prescott is the 10th best quarterback in the NFL from execs, scouts, and coaches?
Yeah, well, I mean, they are strictly basing this off of playoff performance. And I just don't like that because they're not being consistent here. Like Jared Goff at number 8, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm ready to say that Jared Goff is the most overrated quarterback in football. I want to give you a stat. On target throw percentage while being pressured, out of all the returning quarterbacks in football, Dak is number 1 in the league in on-target throw percentage while being pressured. Jared Goff is the 3rd worst in the league. And when you go to comparing quarterbacks, I'm big on how do you perform when you're being pressured? when things aren't going well for you.
Mm.
And when Jared Goff is being pressured, he's really bad. Like that Dallas Cowboys game at the end of the season, people can cry about Decker not reporting. They lost that game because Jared Goff threw 2 interceptions and he did not play very well that game. Even though Dallas literally told them, here's the game. We don't want this game. We're good. Take the game. And they didn't take it because Jared Goff was so poor that game. And he gets a lot of respect for getting to the Super Bowl and getting the NFC Championship game. We do realize that the Rams won a Super Bowl the year after Jared Goff left that team. It was very clear that he was the piece that held that team back. And they went and they got a better quarterback. And the year after, they won a Super Bowl. I don't think people really talk about that when it comes to Jared Goff. And just when you look at his game in its totality, arm strength, like it's fine. Accuracy, it's fine. Pocket presence, okay. Out of structure playmaking, it's non-existent with him. And when you look at a guy like Dak, the reason why he's a better quarterback is because, like I talked about with the pressure, Dak is one of the best quarterbacks in the league when being blitzed, when facing pressure. He makes up for some of the deficiencies that the Cowboys offensive line has had over these past few seasons here. Dak is a very good out of structure playmaker. He's very accurate, makes plays on all 3 levels of the field. I think that he carries the offense more than people want to give him credit for. It's not a great scheme over in Dallas with Mike McCarthy. It's a stagnant offense to where I would say in Detroit, Ben Johnson is going to get a head coaching job after this season. He definitely could have gotten a head coaching job this year. And it's because of how, it's because of how good of a job he's done creating that scheme, crafting it, being able to sequence plays. And I just don't feel like Dak Prescott has had a coordinator even close to a Ben Johnson or a Sean McVay. And I think if that was the case, maybe you'd see, more playoff success out of him. Maybe you would see a higher level of play out of him. But even without that, you're still seeing a guy who is consistently a top 10 quarterback this past season. I think it's fair to say that he was a top 5 quarterback this past season. And him being 10 following a year where he was ranked number 9. Last year, he was ranked number 9, and he was not coming off a season nearly as good as the one that he had this past season. So they're clearly just taxing the playoff performance. It's fair. I get it. But again, it's not consistent with the rest of the West.
Yeah, so I tend to swing towards the opposite side of the pendulum is going, and I was highly critical of Dak Prescott a few years ago. And now I feel like I'm rooting for Dak Prescott this year. One, because the Philadelphia Eagles fan base has just gotten to be ridiculously irritating for a number of reasons. So I won't even get into that. But they're driving me insane recently, which is funny because social media thought I was an Eagles fan last year, when in reality I just like to be honest. But Dak Prescott, there's this narrative that he's just bad. Well, no. Mike McCarthy, I mean, he's a head coach that he's just a middle of the road guy. The whole scheme with the Dallas Cowboys, it's a lot of CeeDee Lamb and nothing else. I know we like Jake Ferguson. We're probably not going to make the argument that he's a top 3 tight end, but it's really the CeeDee Lamb or bust offense. And I'm not going to, again, criticize Dak Prescott for that, especially when a while ago I would, because his contract was so massive. But that's not the case anymore. His contract is not massive anymore. Now we'll get into the contract discussions in just a second, which I'll turn to that in just a second here. But it's just interesting to me because now it does feel like Dak Prescott is a little undervalued and a little underappreciated. Yes. Are the playoff performances not there? Sure. But last year was really impressive for Dak. That's an offense that doesn't exactly have a ton of superstars. Tony Pollard isn't what we hoped he was going to be as the bell cow back. The offensive line struggled to stay healthy at times. The coaching staff is just not great. And then it's a lot of CeeDee Lamb or bust. Dak Prescott was asked to carry that Dallas Cowboys offense oftentimes last year. And I remember specifically on the road against Philly, a game in which they lost. He was pretty much the reason they were in that game and probably should have won that game if he wears a cleat a half a size smaller and doesn't step out of bounds. I say, is Dak Prescott underappreciated? Kind of similar to the Josh Allen narrative. Is he underrated? Because you see this report now. The Dallas Cowboys, and we'll switch over to this.
I want to add one more thing to
Yeah,
this.
go for it. Go for it. Go for it.
You know, another thing he doesn't get credit for as well. Everybody acts like the Eagles are the class of the NFC East. They've won the division one time in the last 4 seasons. The Cowboys have won the division 2 of the last 3 years. They did not back into the division like people try to make it seem. They won 12 games. You don't back into a division if you win 12 games. That's just a ridiculous statement. And on top of that, the Eagles probably should have lost 3 or 4 more games this past season. They were not that good of a team last year. Their record was way better than what the team actually was. So this whole narrative that, you know, Jalen Hurts and the Eagles are the class of the NFC East, it's just not the case. It's not based in reality because they don't have the track record to bring that up. If you want to say the Bills are the class of the AFC East, you're correct. If you want to say the Chiefs are the class of the AFC West, you would be correct there. If you want to say the Buccaneers are the class of the NFC South, regardless of the fact that they've won their division the last 2 years with mediocre records, you can say that because they've won the division 4 years in a row. The Eagles are imposters when it comes to that statement. They are not the class of the NFC East. I'm not even going to say it's Dallas. If you want to say it's Dallas, that's fine, but I'm not even going to say that. It's a division that changes winners every single year. That's been the case for the last 20-something years. So I want to put that out.
You know what? We weren't planning on talking about this, but now we're going to. We'll get to the Dallas Cowboys contract discussions in just a second. This is really interesting. I talked about this yesterday on my show, Ben Garcia show, and I thought it was interesting. There was a report that there was a disconnect between Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts. And here's why there's a disconnect. Nick Sirianni is a man-child. He's emotional. He emotes. He acts like a literal child, screaming at Chiefs fans after a Monday Night Football win in which, congrats, Marquez Valdez-Scantling can't catch the football. Or in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs, he's taunting the other team, and Jalen Hurts has to be the adult. Nick Sirianni was clearly propped up by Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon. I'm not buying the Philadelphia Eagles hype this year. I'm simply not buying it. A lot of issues in the back end of their defense last year in the secondary. And they decide with their limited resources, we're going to throw tens of millions of dollars at Saquon Barkley, a running back statistically who's not that much different from DeAndre Swift last year. They lose Jason Kelce on the offensive line. Who knows how that's going to affect the tush push? And then they say, you know what? We're going to attack the secondary by putting rookies back there. If there's a learning curve for any position in the NFL, from college to pros, it's secondary, cornerbacks, safeties. I don't expect it to be much better. I absolutely do not approve of them giving Nick Sirianni another shot with new coordinators. The Philadelphia Eagles, to me, are a team that may make the playoffs simply because of talent alone, just like last year. They're not a Super Bowl team to me. I like Jalen Hurts. I think he's an adult. I don't think he's a top 5 quarterback. And when you compound the injuries that really just humbled him last year into the fact that it really hurt him on the back end, not being able to scramble out. If he's not a 2-dimensional player, then he's really nothing at all, meaning he really relies on that running game to get that, open up some passing lanes, get some cornerbacks, get some safeties to bite, because he's not a precise passer. That is, I feel like, indisputable. So this Philadelphia Eagles team, I know you're a Cowboy fan, and it's hard to be unbiased, but I trust your judgment here. Am I insane for saying this team may not be a playoff team this year? And if they are, it'll be off of talent alone. But is this basically the beginning of the end for Nick Sirianni and the Philadelphia Eagles, like I believe it is, because they've allocated their resources to the running back position and not to the position that basically cost them multiple games last year because James Bradbury can't cover anyone?
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. You know, I look at this Eagles team and look, I get that I'm a Cowboys fan. I cover the Cowboys, but I try to look at things from an unbiased perspective. I think I agree with you with Jalen Hurts. I think he's a fine quarterback. I look at A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, one of the best duos in the league. Dallas Goedert, very, very good tight end. Their offensive line, they got some nice pieces on that offensive line. It's not as good as it once was, but it's still a very good unit. Saquon Barkley, he's a really good running back. But, we all saw this team was very talented last year. Talent was not the problem. It's what they had at the coaching staff. Nick Sirianni should not be employed. And by the way, I've been critical of Howie Roseman, not because I don't think he's a really good GM. I think he is, but I don't think people cover him in a fair manner. I think they kind of just look past some of the bad things that he's done, like the fact that he's fired, 3 coaches now? It's Andy Reid, Chip Kelly, Doug Peterson. He's on his 4th coach. I think part of the reason why Nick Sirianni is still there is because Howie Roseman didn't want to be the general manager that fired 4 head coaches. General managers do not survive that. They don't survive some of the draft misses that they had over the past few years that nobody wants to criticize him for. Nobody criticizes him, it seems like, anymore for the Jalen Reagor, Justin Jefferson thing because, they got A.J. Brown. Okay, they got A.J. Brown, but they spent a first-round pick to go get him, and they spent money to acquire him as well, which, hey, that first-round pick could have been used somewhere else to maybe improve your defense that wasn't very good last year. The Jordan Davis thing, drafting Jordan Davis over Kyle Hamilton, who is clearly the superior player, he doesn't get criticized for that. He doesn't get criticized for drafting Nolan Smith over Joey Porter Jr. when their secondary last year was terrible and their pass rush was perfectly fine going into the season. They had plenty of guys at the at defensive end that they could have relied on, but they drafted a defensive end that they didn't need that year over a cornerback that it looked like, hey, he would have been better than James Bradbury, way better than them. I don't love the roster construction here. It's very heavy on one side of the football to where I look at their defense. I don't think their run defense is going to be good. And I don't think their pass rush is going to be good either. I mean, who do they have rushing the passer? Jalen Carter, who I think is going to have a big year this year. I think he's going to be a hell of a player. But other than that, like Josh Sweat is good, but I'm not afraid to play Josh Sweat. Bryce Huff, Brandon Graham, Nolan Smith. Like I'm just not impressed by what they have rushing the passer. I think Jordan Davis is completely overrated. I don't think their linebackers are good at all. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and Reed Blankenship, I think they're both overrated as well. They're good players, like solid players.
Chauncey Gardner-Johnson wasn't great for the Lions last year, and he's expected to fix their secondary.
And he's injury prone too. And then I feel like with their cornerbacks, they're mixing, older players with young players, and that's, it's good for the long-term health of the younger players when it comes to their development. But if that's your plan, it's not necessarily a great plan of attack due to the fact that I would argue they don't have anybody in their prime on their defense right now. And especially in their secondary, I don't think they have anybody in their prime. Darius Slay starting to lose a step, especially at a position like cornerback, where that's a young man's position. So I have the same concerns about the Philadelphia Eagles. I think people are looking at their roster and they're seeing the big names and they're seeing the draft type that this team has. But I think that they have problems with their coaching staff when it comes to Nick Sirianni. We'll see what happens with Fangio, who, by the way, a lot of those Dolphin players did not like him at all. And Kellen Moore, I think Kellen Moore's fine, but at the same time, his offense takes a little bit to get used to. It's a very complex offense. Will Greer said it. He said, man, this is the most complex offense I've ever been in my life.
It is. Sorry, continue.
When I was watching film during the 21 and 22 seasons for the Cowboys, one thing I said is this is complex for the offense and simple for the defense. It's not a lot of creative concepts. It's a lot of curls. It's a lot of slants. It's, they're running cover 2 beaters on cover 1 beaters on cover 2. It's, to me, when I look at Kellen Moore's offense, I'm not wowed by it like some people in NFL circles are. I think he's above average, and that'll be an upgrade from what they had last year. But, I look at the Eagles and I say they're probably a 10-win team, but Super Bowl team, no, I don't think so.
It's a lot of talent on that team, which is why I do believe they can win 9 or 10 games. I don't think that's a stretch. I think just for me, it's not a Super Bowl contender just because you add a premium position in Saquon Barkley. Let's move over to this because I'm running out of time here, but this has been so good. Let's talk about this. There's a report out of Dallas, shifting back over to the Dallas Cowboys, that they're prioritizing CeeDee Lamb's extension over Dak Prescott. Now, this is what it tells me. When I see the Dallas Cowboys are prioritizing an extension for wide receiver CeeDee Lamb over Dak Prescott, it tells me they're not as serious about Dak Prescott as they used to be. Now, let me finish here because it's not a indictment on Dak Prescott. I just think the Dallas Cowboys are saying, well, if a wide receiver is more important to our team than our quarterback, it feels like our chances of winning a Super Bowl are over before they begin. Dak Prescott has been a fine and at times a very good quarterback in the NFL. Now, granted, is there a chance you can win a Super Bowl with Dak Prescott? I'm not so sure. Is there a chance that you can win multiple playoff games in the same year with Dak Prescott? That has been my biggest concern with Dak. But here's what I will say. And you mentioned this to me, Kris. What's the alternative? What's the alternative to Dak Prescott? You're not going to be worse than what you were last year. So that means you're going to trade up and pray that a quarterback saves you. I think the Dallas Cowboys are doing this all wrong. When you prioritize an extension with a wide receiver over a quarterback in which the wide receiver is directly affected by who's his quarterback is, I think it's a bad look for the Dallas Cowboys. If it is indeed true that they're prioritizing extension with CeeDee Lamb over Dak Prescott, because it tells me they're prepared to lose Dak Prescott. And although I've been highly critical of Dak Prescott, you're the Dallas Cowboys. You cannot be irrelevant. You're not the Arizona Cardinals. You're not the Atlanta Falcons, where if you suck, no one notices. What does it tell you that the Dallas Cowboys are indeed prioritizing an extension with CeeDee Lamb over Dak Prescott? Does it tell you the same thing it tells me, that they're just not that serious about Dak?
So one thing I will say is there's been some mixed reporting when it comes to this, because I did hear that report, but I also heard a report from Jeremy Fowler that said they're all in on signing Dak. He's the priority right now. So there's a lot of mixed messaging coming out of, this whole situation. To me, I do think they get Dak done. I think they end up signing all three of these guys, Dak, CeeDee, and Micah, just because when you look at the Cowboys salary cap in future years, I don't think enough people have done enough research on it, which is perfectly fine. Not everybody covers the team as intently as I do. They're completely fine when it comes to salary cap space over the next few years. They're going to have $65 million in 2025. But here's the thing. Dak Prescott already accounts $40 million against the cap in 2025 with a dead money cap hit. If they re-sign him, they don't have to worry about that. That'll just become a cap hit for Dak Prescott, and they'll push that out into future years. They already have $21 million on the cap for Micah Parsons' fifth-year extension. The only guy that they don't have under the cap for next season or money accounted for would be CeeDee Lamb. So, and then when you look out into the future, I believe their 2026 salary cap is $160 million, and their 2027 salary cap, I believe it would be, is $256 million. So they have plenty of cap space to get this done and get all three of these guys under contract. And I want people to understand this, because I even heard this on Scoop City with, Diana Rossini and Chase Daniels. Chase Daniels was talking about, Dak's going to count 60, Mike is going to count 35, and CeeDee is going to count 35. But they're not. Like that would mean that all three of those guys signed a fully guaranteed contract, and that 100% of their money is going against the cap. It's not. In reality, you're probably looking at around 43-ish million for Dak on the cap next season. You're looking at around, a little over 20 for CeeDee and a little over 20 for Micah Parsons in future years. And then obviously you'll restructure it. You'll push money off in the future. And, obviously we know the salary cap always goes up. So that's the reason why you want to do something like that. So when it comes to fitting these three guys on the cap, they'll be able to do it. But when it comes to CeeDee being a priority over Dak, the only reason why I would say that could potentially be the case is because CeeDee Lamb is a much easier deal to get done. There's there's a more defined framework around that contract than there is for Dak Prescott because of how unprecedented this situation has been with the amount of leverage Dak Prescott has. So it wouldn't surprise me if CD gets a deal first, just because he is also holding out a training camp. So, I do think eventually they get all three of these guys done. I think Micah will be next year. I think CD will be this year. And I think Dak, they'll get them done this year. And they'll have all three of those guys for the future.
So here's what I will say. When people say that they're going to spend a ton of money on Micah, CD Lamb, and Dak Prescott, that is what you want to do. You want to hit home runs in the draft to where you're paying your star players. And also, you're absolutely right. Just because they're making, let's just say Dak gets $60 million a year. Just because it says $60 million a year, which I understand is crazy money, he's not going to get that. He's probably going to be closer to 48. Let's say he gets 60 million. That doesn't mean it counts all against the cap. There's signing bonuses. There's a way you can convert it. And a Dallas Cowboys team with Jerry Jones, who knows how much longer he's going to be around, that's the harsh reality, wants to win a Super Bowl again, they'll have money to spend. Let me ask you this last question because I'm curious to know what you think. I absolutely do believe this is Dak Prescott's last year with the Dallas Cowboys. I think that they see this is as far as they can go. They're frustrated by it. Without a clear succession plan, I think it's the wrong decision. As we close here, this will be my last question towards you. Do you think do you think Dak Prescott is a Dallas Cowboy for the foreseeable future? A contract gets done and he's a Cowboy for quote unquote life. Let's call it the next 4 to 5 years.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think they're going to get a contract done. This is what the Cowboys do. But, my question to people would be this. When have the Cowboys wanted to sign a player and not, like when it comes to their own players, and not gotten the deal done? I think they'll get this done. Let me give you something as well. I'm going to put this out here. If Dak Prescott is not the quarterback in 2025 for the Dallas Cowboys, Russell Wilson will be their quarterback that year. Hear me out. Dak is going to count for dead money on the cap. Russell Wilson is not a guy who's going to make a bunch of money over the next few years of his career. He's also a guy who has veteran experience. He's won a Super Bowl. I think that that's the route they're going to go. And if that's the case, it really makes no sense because you're paying, again, $40 million to Dak Prescott and whatever money you're going to pay towards Russell Wilson for a far inferior quarterback at this point of his career.
Ton of fun to be able to talk with my guy, Kris. He gets it. If you follow the Cowboys, this is legitimately the only guy you should be following. And we know of some of the same people that cover the Cowboys, and I'm still just over it. Kris, for all things football, mostly Dallas Cowboys, whether it's on TikTok, Cowboys Beat, Twitter, whatever it is, this is the guy you should be following. Kris, I appreciate you making time for me today. I appreciate you talking with me today. I know we talked way longer than I thought we were going to, but it's been fun. It was a good time, and I appreciate you hopping on and talking with me, man.
Absolutely. I appreciate you for having me on.